Okay, you should be live now.
Oh, there's Keith.
Howdy, howdy.
Streaming live, so
Ignore my text, Keith. I thought you had said 6 on the phone, so I was texting you just to make sure you knew it was 5:30.
Appreciate it.
Are you in a different time zone, Mayor? It's hard to tell.
No, I haven't traveled in 10 months.
Weeks. Oh.
Retrieved my phone. Are we all here?
I'm looking, Mr. Mayor. I don't see Councilor Scott yet.
Okay.
For those watching the stream, disregard the date on the title of the video. I will fix it after the meeting is over. It is, the date's incorrect.
Give Doug another minute or two.
John M.
Did somebody text Doug?
I just texted him.
Okay.
He may have thought it started at 6, so I'm guessing. So while we're waiting, another relatively good day in Oregon, only 637 cases today. I think we're doing better than the rest of the country.
Hmm.
At least it is moving in the right direction.
Yes. Got to get more vaccines in people's arms.
All right, well, we'll get started, and Doug can join us when he's able to.
Yep, thank you.
Let's call to order our regular city council work session for Tuesday, January 19th, 2021. We have two topics, at least two topics for our work session today. First is a Ura Plan update.
So I will go ahead and start. You got a memo from me and Bruce on Friday with sort of giving you a quick update on where we're at in terms of the advisory committee, as well as the current draft project list and the current draft priorities, as well as a memo from Nick and Elaine explaining some issues that we need some input from you guys on. So the question that and thank you, Nick, for sharing your screen. If you can go to the next slide. maybe. So what we are asking for input from council on tonight is what near-term projects could be moved to later years. Are there projects that could be removed from the project list? And if so, which ones? And how aggressive or risky should we assume the city will be in regards to financing in the near-term projects? And Nick and Elaine are going to explain why we have these questions. And really what we need is input from council so that we can finalize the financing plan before we take it to the advisory committee for their input. But we wanted to get your guys' input before we did that. So that's kind of what we're here to discuss this evening. Happy to answer any other questions that you may have on the URA as well. But that's where we're at. And I'll turn it over to Nick to dive into the financial details.
All right, thanks, Julia. A lot of familiar faces here tonight, so I won't go into a lot of background on the project or how we got here. I know that we've been working with City Council on these urban renewal issues for, gosh, maybe right about a year now or close to it. Ultimately tonight, we're really seeking input on what we refer to as the finance plan. A finance plan is one component of the report that's required by Oregon revised statutes to go along with the urban renewal plan. The finance plan really does two key things. The first is it's the central analysis for determining that the urban renewal plan that you might be adopting is financially feasible. And that again is required by ORS. In addition to that determination of financial feasibility, the plan does a really good job, or the finance plan does a really good job of establishing the long-term intentions of City Council. So the urban renewal area will exist for a long time, and every year there's going to be budgeting decisions that are made and which project gets funded and what dollar amount. Establishing the finance plan up front helps to set the tone for all future budget decisions on what the original intentions of City Council were. The plan, in large part, despite being important for those two reasons, in large part, these plans are non-binding. So most of the elements of the plan are not things that are locked in stone and that tie the city's hands into the future, but there are a couple of elements that are binding. That's the descriptions of eligible projects. So both the plan and report list the projects that the money will be spent on in the urban renewal area. This finance plan includes that same list of projects. So that list of projects is binding. The urban renewal area can't spend funds on other types of projects in the future without an amendment. And then the total maximum indebtedness. So the total cost of those projects and the portion that's going to be funded with urban renewal dollars, that's also binding. Some of the very interesting and important elements of the plan that are non-binding include how much funds are allocated to any individual project and when those projects might receive that funding. So those two things are really, I would say, at the core of this financial feasibility analysis, looking at a list of individual projects, how much funding we anticipate they will receive, and when they will receive those funds. That's how we determine if this is financially feasible. But those nitty-gritty assumptions are not binding. So if we assume at this stage that a project is going to cost $2 million, but the city ends up spending $3 million or $1 million on it in the future, that's fine. But at this stage of the game, we do need to make sure that with our current analysis, everything does add up correctly and matches the amount of revenue that we're planning to receive over the planned horizon. So that's at play today, is really getting your input on the finance plan that we've come up with. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about these non-binding elements, the allocation of funds to specific projects and the timing of those specific projects. And hopefully with your input, we'll be able to come up with a solution that does match the City Council's long-term intentions for the area while also being financially feasible. And Julia, I'll turn it back over to you for the next couple of slides here on the project list and how we came up with the project list.
Thanks. Basically, the initial project was identified by city staff for the feasibility study that was presented to council back in July. And council said, yes, go forth and work on developing a URA plan. In December, we brought the list of projects to the advisory committee that was formed by council. And we updated the project list, cost estimates, and desired timing. That was, for the cost estimates, that was really primarily from existing plans. There were a few projects that were added after the feasibility study based on input, including broadband. We added a network of right-of-way for the potential broadband. Festival Plaza was added to that site, and that cost estimate staff developed very quickly. Some may call it a WAG estimate, which is a wild guess, but it was based on how much we spent on, or roughly what we spent on the parking lot across from the Legion parking lot. We also included the existing public works facility in the area. I think that's all the projects that we added from what council had originally seen. And then so the advisory committee reviewed those, provided input, staff took that input and cost estimates, and basically tried to fit those cost estimates into what our target capacity was, and identified some desired timing based on what we believed the desired timing was from council input and conversations. And we gave that to the consultants, and they took that and prepared the finance plan and identified some issues that they need to talk to you guys about. So this is the list of projects that were identified. Again, most of them are all things that you had seen in the feasibility study, except for, as I mentioned, the Sherwood broadband installation, the Festival Plaza parking. I'm just looking down to see, I believe we had the Public Works facility in there still. So yeah, everything other than that. And then administration, we wanted to make sure that we had some funding identified for just the operation of the program. From, there will be a variety of people that dabble in that, including finance, economic development, planning, engineering, to make these projects come forward. The total project cost is, for the most part, what was identified in the plans. And then we identified a URA share of kind of, not all of those are going to be funded 100% by the URA. So for example, if you look at Oregon Street Regional Water Quality Facility, we said maybe half of that will be URA. And so even though the total project cost is more, we thought that there could be a legitimate argument for approximately half of that overall project being funded from the URA. So that's how we identified that. The 99W pedestrian bridge, we took off what we are hoping to get in other funding. So that's why that went from 12 million to 8 million. I'm not going to go through every single one of those, but that was the gist of what we did. We did take out the Forest Creek Drive extension because when we had to reduce the acreage of the URA to fit within the acreage that we're allowed to have, we took out the land where the Forest Creek Drive extension was. And so we couldn't have a project in an area that wasn't in the URA. And then we took out the YMCA expansion for similar reasons. We can certainly talk about that, but it is a large price tag, and feedback we had been getting from the advisory committee is a strong hesitance, I guess, I'm not sure if that's the right word, a strong desire to not have those types of public projects be in a URA that aren't bringing in tax revenue. And then there's also been discussion of the property itself. So that was removed from the list going forward. And then under the priority, again, that was more staff level based on what we believed council direction was, as well as the economic development potential within those areas. So we knew that there were some projects that could and should happen fairly quickly. Oregon Street, those projects are up there under urgent just simply because they're in design now. And so if they're going to be funded from URA, they would need to be funded fairly early on. But that's something we can talk about too, because there are possibilities of having that funded through city funds. So I think that is it.
Julia, can I?
Yeah.
Do you mind if I add something real quick? If
Yeah.
you could go back one slide. Because some people, especially people watching, might be wondering if the YMCA, because it wouldn't generate taxes, is taken off. Why wasn't the public works facility taken off? And
Yeah.
and the note on that one that's real important for everyone to understand is that actually frees up a lot of land in our downtown core that can then be developed. So it does actually add taxable land to the URA, and the site that we're currently proposing to put that on is land that can't be developed otherwise.
Yes, thank you.
Did I get that right?
Yep. Yes. And the reason why we identified, again, not that full amount, is that there will likely be contributions from the water and sewer and storm. Those rates should be contributing to the public works facility versus just the URA. But the URA, it will benefit by, like you said, bringing property back into the tax rolls at a higher value than if we just left it where it was. I think that's it, unless there are questions on the project list. So I guess in quick summary and transition back to Nick. So in the advisory committee and staff got to a target number and then gave the consultants the prioritization of those project numbers. And again, that's where Nick and his team found some issues that he needs to discuss with you. Nick.
Okay, great. So we took the list of projects, the estimated costs, the share of those costs from urban renewal, and the desired timing, and threw them into a spreadsheet to try and see if we could fund them at that desired timing and at that desired amount. This chart just shows the general desired timing. So roughly $20 million worth of projects that city staff identified would like to have funding in the first 3 years of the urban renewal area. Another $30 million of projects that the city would like to fund in years 4 through 10. So that adds up to about 50 million in the first decade. And then another $20 million worth of projects to fund after that, years 11 through 30 of the urban renewal area. When we did our first pass at the finance plan, we wound up with this available funding scenario. So only $4 million of capacity in the first 3 years, another 16 million from years 4 to 10, and then 50 million in years 11 and beyond. So these two funding comparisons show a pretty significant disconnect in the timing of when we would like funds to be available and when we are anticipating funds will actually be available. The overall size of the graphs, the total amount of projects being funded, are relatively close to each other. So not a huge difference in the total amount of capacity and the total amount of project costs. The more concerning thing when we're looking at the finance plan is, well, how can we accommodate all these projects that the city would like to have happen soon when this urban renewal area and most urban renewal areas tend to start off pretty humble in their financial capacity and have that grow over time. So don't
Nick,
be. Oh, go ahead.
I apologize, Nick. Quick question. What was your growth assumptions?
Yeah, so I would have to go back and look at our detailed spreadsheet there. We had generic growth rates overall for the property in the area, but we also included all of those site-specific development assumptions. So working with staff to identify all the projects that are currently planned for development or under discussion for development, and estimating how much new construction would take place in these early years. That certainly is one thing that we could look at. If there was more construction happening than anticipated early on, that would certainly allow you to have more funding early on. Though as we went through the feasibility study, we definitely kicked the tires on the development projections a fair amount. I will say that this chart that we're showing here, the difference between desired and feasible, that feasible chart was our first pass at the analysis. And after talking with city staff, we have done 2 more iterations, each one using some more aggressive financing assumptions. And so I'll be showing those in a moment. And those charts will show with more aggressive assumptions. Again, we don't really get more capacity in the aggregate long term over the next 30 years, but we do achieve a better goal of front loading more of that funding. So this is our first, oh, go ahead.
Why would you not? Why would you? So you'll undoubtedly review it, but if you have a greater development rate, that should expand your maximum indebtedness.
Correct. Yes. If there were more construction, well, okay, let me just rephrase again. If at this stage of the project, before the plan is adopted, we forecast more construction activity, then that would lead to more TIF revenue over the forecast period, which would allow us to set a maximum indebtedness that is higher than the 131 million that is shown here. And that would allow you to fund more projects over that lifespan, as well as to have more projects funded early on. If we adopt a plan with a maximum indebtedness of 131 million, and then more construction happens after the plan is adopted, the fact that there is more TIF revenue being generated more quickly does not automatically change that maximum indebtedness. So the maximum indebtedness is a policy decision that you all will make. That policy decision, however, has to have a report that shows that it's financially feasible. And that financial feasibility analysis needs to be based on reasonable assumptions for the growth and assessed value in the area. So I can, we can have a follow-up conversation and I can dig up all of those assumptions that we used for the growth and assessed value here. But I will say that we worked with staff this last summer to be pretty thorough in identifying all the development opportunities that staff were aware of in the short term in this area. And then as we got more long-term, we included broader, more generic growth assumptions to capture the development potential here.
Great. So we can do a follow-up meeting and because that didn't answer my point. So thanks.
Sure.
Nick, let me jump in just real quick. I pulled up the spreadsheet and the initial years until fiscal year in 2026 were at 3%, but from them on, the generic growth rate was 6%, which is fairly aggressive and was reviewed with staff. And like Nick said, in addition to that, he added specific exception value growth assumptions. So, but that just gives you an idea of the general AV growth.
Thanks.
So the initial finance plan that we did wound up again showing we're forecasting 155 million in total TIF revenue over the 30-year period. We show that would be enough to support a maximum indebtedness of 131 million. The difference between those two numbers is the amount of your TIF revenue that would wind up being spent on interest on debt over time, rather than being spent on the principal amount of projects. And the more you borrow early on, the greater that ratio really is of principal to interest, or rather interest to principal. And then we show what that capacity is in today's dollars. So that maximum indebtedness, 131 million, but a lot of those projects would not be funded for years down the road. So adjusting for inflation, we show that you have capacity for somewhere around 72 to 73 million dollars of projects in today's dollars. And our analysis in 5-year chunks showed that that would build over time, with the last decade having the most amount of capacity. However, again, that was with one set of assumptions. The key assumptions in the finance plan, assuming that we have just one growth forecast that all of our scenarios are looking at. So the same amount of projected TIF revenue in all of these scenarios, but we're looking at the different interest rates, the different amortization period, and the different debt service coverage ratio assumptions for any new loans that are incurred by this urban renewal area. So we started off assuming interest rates of 5%. Those are fairly typical from a long-term historical perspective and something that we would expect to see going forward. However, at this current moment in time, interest rates are much lower than that, maybe even below 3% if the area were to exist today and borrow today. And they've been low for some time now and will likely remain low for at least the next several years. So as we moved to some more aggressive assumptions in scenarios 2 and 3, we started off our interest rates on early year borrowings at lower levels. So at 3.5% interest in scenario 2 and 3% in scenario 3. In all of those scenarios, we show that once you get a decade into the future, we do go back up to the 5% interest rate assumption, assuming that these rock bottom interest rates aren't going to continue forever.
So Nick,
Yeah.
a quick question. In terms of the debt service coverage ratio, typically what do the lenders, what are the ranges they're looking for?
Yeah, so every lender and every jurisdiction is going to be different. In this particular situation, you'd be looking at a brand new urban renewal area with no revenue history of its own. If that urban renewal area were to try to borrow on its own without any pledge of additional revenues, if needed by the city government itself, the lender might want to see a particularly high debt service coverage ratio, so 1.5 or even more. Oftentimes, these urban renewal areas wind up having the pledge of their sponsoring city as a backstop for any borrowings that they incur. Once that happens, lenders actually don't care at all about the coverage ratio. It now becomes the city that cares about the coverage ratio. So if the city says our general fund is here as a backstop, lenders will say, great, we'll loan you the money. We don't really care if your urban renewal area shows that it has the resources to pay us back, because if it doesn't, we'll just come for your general fund. So lenders at that point don't become the barrier, but the city's own risk management policies. What we show here is this.
Of course, we could.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, and of course, we could lend ourselves the money and use the Ura to pay that loan back as well, correct?
Right. If you had a fund with available capacity, then you could lend that money to the urban renewal area. Yes. So what we've shown here, these coverage ratios ranging from a 1.5 to down to a 1.1 in scenario 3. 1.5 is fairly typical, but it's also, in my experience, unnecessarily conservative when it comes to urban renewal. So urban renewal being based on property tax revenues and fueled by the increment growth in the area, it is a very dependable and usually a very rapidly growing revenue stream in the early years. So if you started out with a 1.5 coverage ratio, we would not be shocked to see you be up over 2 times coverage ratio just a few years down the road. Because the revenue grows so quickly, and it's so dependable, as opposed to, something like your parking meter revenue, which might be flat and stagnant year after year, and could be susceptible to big swings. Urban renewal revenue tends to be more stable and more fast growing, so a lower coverage ratio does make sense. When we got to scenario 3 with that 1.1 coverage ratio in the early years, that's about as low as I have seen other jurisdictions use for planning purposes. They still want to make sure that as they're forecasting their revenues forward, they think that they will have more than enough to cover the debt service payments every year, so they don't ever have to dip into their general fund. But certainly 1.5 could be viewed as too conservative. So, and then on amortization period, for all the scenarios, we did start off with 20-year borrowings. Some lenders might be willing to go longer than that. And if you did go longer than that, you could have additional capacity up front, but that would come at the expense of capacity long-term, because you'd be spending more and more of your TIF revenue on interest payments for those early, very long-term loans. So I recommend that in all these scenarios, we really are looking mostly at 20-year borrowings that then ratchet down towards 10 as you get closer to the end of the urban renewal's lifespan. Though again, at the end of tonight's conversation, if there are certainly urgent projects the city really needs to have funding for, in the very early years, one strategy would be to take those initial borrowings and extend them out to 25 or even 30 years. It would likely reduce your long-term total capacity, but it would get you more funding up front. So those were the range of financial scenarios we looked at. Looking at how that affects our finance plan, all of them have essentially the same capacity in today's dollars. You'll see that they do range from 72 to 74 million here. Part of that is just because when we were doing these additional scenarios, we did not fine tune the years of expenditures for individual projects long term, as we did in our initial scenario. So there are the level of analysis makes it look like the total capacity might shift around a little bit, but in reality, we're looking at the same roughly $73 million of capacity in all of these scenarios long term. The difference between them all comes down to when is that funding available? And you can see that scenario 3 with our most aggressive set of assumptions winds up doubling the amount of capacity that the area has in its first 5 years. Now, over time, this chart is showing the same thing as that last table, but just in a chart form. So you can see here in these early years, the scenario 3, the orange line, really jumps out way ahead of the pack in terms of the amount of capacity it has for projects. But over time, the other scenarios catch up to it. And when we get to the ending point, again, there's very little difference in terms of the total capacity of projects funded over the life of it. But nonetheless, that's an example of how these more aggressive assumptions, if the city wanted to pursue these more aggressive assumptions, allow you to have in the early years substantially more capacity, recognizing that that does reduce the capacity that's available later on and winds up being a wash when it comes out 30 years from now. So that's the technical background on where we're at today, and recognizing that even with the more aggressive assumptions that we are looking at here, we are still looking at something around $17 million in the first 5 years, and then a total of around 20 to 23 million in the first decade. And that these cities' initial look at this analysis wound up having close to $50 million of projects that they wanted in the first decade. So trying to find ways to balance the available capacity against the desired timing of projects is what we're looking at today. And it gets us back to these 3 questions of what near-term projects could be moved to the later years. Are there projects that could be removed from the project list entirely? If so, which ones? And then how aggressive should we assume the city will be in regards to financing near-term projects? So I can either turn off my PowerPoint screen sharing now, or I can leave it on the project list slide, if that'll be helpful.
Good to leave that on the project list slide unless others feel differently. And it might be easiest to tackle the last question first, which is the risk question.
So Julia, I don't expect the city to pursue any of the finance scenarios that Nick touches upon, but you need to put something on the books. And my perspective, and let others weigh in, but we will want to quickly build the bridge, Sherwood Broadband, and the Festival Plaza. And once the district is formed to make these projects real, the city would fund them initially. And then once the district had the borrowing capacity, the district could pay the city back the portion of the project that is urban renewal. So, and that's completely legal and takes advantage of interest rates and the importance of these projects. And so to make that work in a funding plan to be part of the thing we ultimately adopt, if that means you should move one of the Oregon or some of the Oregon projects to just high, great. That doesn't bother me any. And all of that could be changed the day after the Urban Renewal Agency is adopted anyways. The project list looks good to me. The URA share of the total, that total looks good to me for now, until I look at your assumptions with the maximum indebtedness and your modeling. I'm good. That's my perspective.
Thanks, Mayor. So on the URA share, I believe we're going to have to reduce that a little bit. But I think there are projects that we could.
Like I said, I'm not convinced that we need it to be lower than 77 million yet. We might need to drop it to 73 million, but I want
So
to.
Nick, I guess I'm maybe
That's not for today.
Yeah, Nick, what has to happen to get that maximum indebtedness up to 77 million?
Yeah, so two ways it could happen. One would be if we revisited the growth assumptions and went with higher growth that supported more TIF, that supported a higher maximum indebtedness, that translated to more than what we're currently showing in terms of funding for projects in today's dollars. So right now we're assuming a maximum indebtedness of 131 million, and we're then translating that into what we think it would fund in today's dollars based on the timing of those projects. And we're at the 72, 73 million dollar level. The other way that we could wind up with a higher amount of funding for projects in today's dollars would be an example where you have the exact same maximum indebtedness, 131 million, but if throughout the life of the district we wind up having lower interest rates than we're assuming right now, and projects are able to be funded sooner than they currently are estimated to be shown in the finance plan, then that means you'd have less inflation take place over the life of the district. And then your 131 million maximum indebtedness would buy you more in today's dollars. And you'd wind up getting closer to the $77 million figure rather than a $72 million figure. So a combination of one or the other or both of these two things, either forecasting more TIF or forecasting a larger share of the TIF is spent on projects sooner as opposed to later. And that's largely related to interest rates.
And again, just want to make sure I'm understanding. If we made those assumptions that we had a lower interest rate over the life and suddenly interest rates weren't that high, it doesn't really matter. It just means that we're not able to do all the projects that we had identified in the list. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the only, so if you assume high interest rates now and they turn out lower, or if you assume, any of our assumptions that wind up being too conservative now means that you might be able to fund projects sooner and you might be able to get more funded in real terms than we had expected, but your maximum indebtedness would be a fixed, figure that you wouldn't be able to exceed. If the opposite occurred and we had too aggressive of assumptions in our plan, and then reality turned out to be more conservative, it would mean that there would be certain projects that you would not be able to fund the full amount of, or the assumed amount of, in real terms. Either way, that maximum indebtedness figure, 131 million, would be, the same. It's just that it takes you longer to build them, you get less bang for your buck there. And if the things turn out better and you're able to build them sooner, you get more bang from your buck. So,
Russell, I think your hand was up next.
Thanks, Mayor. So is it my understanding that, okay, a couple of questions. First, what do we have to do tonight in order to get prepared for that meeting where we pass it? Do those numbers have to match? Number one. Number two, if we decide at a later point, and I think I read that in the report, to move things around from something from urgent down to high, we don't have to decide that right now. That can shift. We just have to have the project on the list. We can't be adding Is that correct?
Yeah, so any decision made tonight or any input tonight, and even any input that gets officially adopted as part of the report that accompanies the plan, these are non-binding things. So the interest rate, the debt service coverage ratio, the amount of money that goes to an individual project, the timing of that project, all of that is non-binding. And we are actually in a position right now where the total list of projects and their total costs are really close to being aligning with our financial capacity. And it's close enough that shouldn't be too much of a trouble for us to make work with either minor cuts or changes in assumptions that get us more capacity. The big thing is that the urban renewal report does have to have this finance plan in it. And right now, if we were to go forward with the finance plan, it would show a lot of these high priority projects not being able to receive funding for 15 or 20 years from now. And so it's about setting expectations for the community, and having a document that city council is comfortable with adopting, seeing that, if the Cedar Brookway extension doesn't show up until year 20, is that going to be something that causes consternation, knowing that it's not written in stone? And again, any year, the urban renewal area can make budgeting decisions to change which projects get funded when, but this is about setting those expectations and establishing financial feasibility.
Thank you.
Kim, your hand is up.
Yes, but he answered the question that I had.
Awesome. Russell, did you have another question? Nope, your hand's down.
Wait, I think I will just make a comment then, because I think what was just said is kind of important. Is we put out this list to our community, and if it's in an order that doesn't match up with the feasibility, then we have community members that maybe get their high hopes. I think it would be better to move things out of urgent and out of high, because they, like he said, it's non-binding. So they can be moved anytime we have the funds available to do it. So I don't know if that's critical to anybody else, but, or, again, this is my first shot at a URA, so I'm learning as we go, but.
It's a good point, Kim. My perspective was just that, leave the 3 in the urgent, put the others, I don't care where, just so that then the finance plan makes sense, or adjust it even further. But because I'm convinced the concept that I have for us to build those 3 starting in July ish is very doable, because in most cases there's other funds going to the projects that can pay early parts of the cost, and then the urban renewal can take care of the rest when it has the capacity.
And can you explain where those funds would come from?
Broadband, it's a much bigger project than that. As we know, to do it citywide. So it would be a citywide project that we would, in my theory, borrow to build. And then when the district is able to, in 1, 2, 3, 4 years, would repay the city for their part of the project. The pedestrian bridge, we're seeking multiple venues. We'd gotten some money pledged, and we were hoping to get it repledged from the state. And we think there's other dollars from the county or other groups to put towards that project. So those dollars would pay the early loan payments of that project. And the Festival Plaza, it could be paid for with a loan from another city fund, or just a loan in general, and then the district pay it back when it's ready.
Okay. All right, thank you.
But you can't do any of those and get paid back until you form the district, name the projects.
Right.
Then day 2, you can take those steps if the council and the district want to. Tim's got his hand up. Tim's muted.
You're muted, Tim.
No, I wasn't. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
That's weird. No, it's an important point, and just to say that in a different way, especially for folks that are listening, URA is just one way of paying for these projects. It's just one tool. It doesn't mean we can't continue to pursue state dollars, county dollars, metro dollars, and all those different funding mechanisms to make these projects happen. So, and I think that's some of the, when this list goes public, that's some of the education that we, in context, that we need to put around it.
Right. I mean, we would hope that we will have the conversation about the Oregon-Tonkin projects, when and who pays for those. They're on this list, but it doesn't end up meaning that they, the district actually ends up needing to pay for all of it, or even some of those. You just, because we're pursuing lots of pots of money, but it's eligible.
Right. We could have a federal transportation grant come up,
right,
that we qualify for and end up paying for in those projects.
Yep, we could get a federal broadband grant.
Yeah, I think having it in the URA and having sort of funds identified helps us leverage those other things, because it demonstrates the commitment. I know,
yep,
as do you, when we went to the state to talk about the pedestrian bridge, feedback we got was, what skin in the game do you have? And this demonstrates that we have skin in the game for all of these projects.
Yep.
Russell's hands up again.
Yeah, and this may be a side note. Maybe now's not the right time, since we're close to we have 15 more minutes. Is there a quick explanation as to why TVFNR had an issue with the Public Works facility siting? I read that in the report.
So I can take that one. I was in the meeting when they brought it up. So typically, when you're a taxing agency and some of your money's going to get pulled out to pay for these projects, they're looking that there's going to be an ultimate lift in taxes because of the projects that we're doing. So in the end, they make out, even though they lose some taxes in the short term. The issue with the Public Works building is just more of an education issue, because we're freeing up land that can be developed. So it will raise the tax base. So I did have a quick conversation with the chief over at TVFNR, and he couldn't commit. He needs to talk to his board, but when I explained it to him, he got it. He understood what we were trying to do there.
Got it.
But
I thought they had an issue with the site, but it wasn't with the site. It was with the project. So, yeah. Got it. Thanks.
And even if they have an issue, doesn't mean it stops it from happening.
Right.
With our existing urban renewal district that's about ready that will close in the next year or two, whatever the schedule is. It helped build our library, city hall. It helped build our art center. It helped build our Cannery Square Plaza. So you can still build facilities like that with an urban renewal district. Sometimes some taxing agencies aren't super thrilled about it, but they don't have the authority to block it. So with what our plan is, it's much more beneficial because it is doing like what we're saying. Other questions, comments, thoughts?
So if I'm understanding right, to get this back to the committee to be able to do what they need to do, we just need to reorder some of these so it aligns with the financial feasibility better. Keep the 3 in the urgent that the mayor talked about and restructure the rest of the list.
And then maybe adjust the total project URA share once I enlist Council President Tim to join me in reviewing the assumptions.
So if you adjust the URA share list, does that mean something comes off, or you just decrease the amount?
decrease the amount and lower the dollar figure on one or two projects.
Because we want to keep all the projects on, because that's the binding part, is
Yeah.
the list.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the URA share, from my perspective, I want that number to be as large as possible, even if it's aggressive, because we can always, the council and the URA board can choose not to spend all of it going in the future, but it's good to give them that option, or whatever that maximum is. You know what I mean? So it's good to have the list of projects, and even the list of projects can change a year from now. You have to do an amendment to the plan. And we did that with the old district multiple times. But you
And do
cannot,
all the,
you cannot
the-
change the maximum indebtedness figure, though. Very difficult.
when you do the amendment, do all the interested parties have to agree? I mean, do you have to get everybody back together?
Yeah.
Lane is shaking her head no.
No. Changes in projects are typically minor amendments to the plan that are executed by the Urban Renewal Agency.
Okay.
One thought, if we needed to lower the number by 3 or 4 million, those TEA projects, presumably we could lower the URA share somewhat, since there's generally other funding mechanisms like SDCs and stuff that pay for those things.
Excellent point, Doug.
Yeah, that's a great point. I certainly did that with some, but I threw in all of the TEA, but I think we could certainly reduce that by a certain percentage, because there will be some developer contributed. So what I'm hearing is be aggressive with the assumptions. So we basically can get that maximum indebtedness up as high as we can. Being aggressive, having all the, not taking any projects off the list, maybe reducing the assumed URA share if we need to, and then changing some of the urgent into outer years to make the finance plan work. Is that correct?
Yep.
And Nick, is that sufficient feedback for you to do your magic, or is there something else that you need from us?
Yeah, I think that's plenty of direction. So we can touch base with staff tomorrow and just make sure we know exactly what we're doing. But I think we've got the direction we need to revise our finance plan and have it reflect the wishes of City Council before it goes back to the Urban Renewal Advisory Committee at their next meeting.
I have one more quick question. Would we leave the YMCA expansion and Forest Creek Drive extension on here, even though they have a 0 share and they're not in the boundary, I believe, or would we take them off?
So Elaine, that's probably yours to chime in, but I believe that the answer would be, if there's no funding allocated to them, then they would come off the project list in the Urban Renewal Plan.
Yes, and I think we just left those on to let you know the how this has evolved over time and what the input was, so that you can see that's what we started with, but they've changed. So the ones that have the 0 amount would come off the list.
And if in the future we amend the URA to include that area of Forest Creek Drive, and we wanted to add that as a project list, we would do that as an amendment to the URA.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. I think we got that covered. Any other points that we should deal with on that?
Not that I can think of. We're proceeding with the advisory committee. We're working on getting legal description mapping done, which is, this is a big one, very complicated, so it's going to take a little bit of time, but we are factoring that all into our schedule. We've got meetings with Washington County scheduled because there is a portion of that outside the city limits. So we're trucking along, trying to get this established as soon as possible.
Julia, I think we're on schedule overall. Am I correct?
Yeah.
So when should action take place on this in front of?
I believe we have something scheduled with the Ura Advisory Board, which is the same as the existing Ura Advisory Board. It's just a different URA. I believe we have that scheduled in March. No, Elaine's shaking her head. It's scheduled. I just don't know.
It is February 17th. And then we're still hoping to go to the agency on March 2nd. So that means we move really quickly from here on out. But that's what Nick and I have been planning on. So we should be all right.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure we're still trucking along on schedule. I know
we are
aggressive, but I think it's very doable at this point. So
yeah, and just naming wise, we talked about that at a prior work session. I've been referring to it as the 2021 URA. If you guys have any other ideas, because it's not just the Tonkin employment area, it's not just jobs, it's not just anything. It seemed like that was a little bit more inclusive. So that's how I'm referring to it, unless there's objections or better ideas.
URA 2.0, right? Okay.
Well, 2021 sounds good to me. Well, thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
We'll look forward to seeing you in February. Sounds like. So next on our work session agenda is discussing the 2021 council liaison assignments and council retreat discussion. So we're the same city council makeup this year from last year. Everyone that was up for re-election ran and got re-elected. But now's a chance if folks want to make changes in what they do to help us be successful with liaison assignments. Please speak up, or we can talk, not necessarily get it all resolved today, but if there's interest in trying something new or getting away from something for whatever reason, please bring it up. Tim?
I really enjoy my 2 assignments or 3 assignments, police advisory and then community development block grant, which I just think is kind of nice to have a continuity because there's a pretty large learning curve on that. And then the YMCA, unless somebody else wanted the YMCA, but I enjoy those as well.
Thanks, Kim. Tim's hand.
You offered the YMCA because it's at like 6 a.m. in the morning or something like that?
They do them at 6:30 in the morning, but that's fine with me. I mean, that doesn't bother me any.
Well, I can't take it because I would never make that meeting ever.
I'd have to text you to remind you to go to your YMCA meeting.
Well, it helps, at least in the near term, because they're on Zoom or Teams or something.
That's true.
Virtual. Can you imagine when you're going to switch to in-person at some point?
They were prior. They were in person prior.
So I'm fine with the current arrangement. Can we not call the council visioning session a council retreat? Because that gives the impression that we're flying off to Tahiti or something to meet and brainstorm. Could we just call it our annual visioning session or something like that?
Yes, we can rebrand it.
Awesome.
Fly to the.
I mean, I wouldn't pass up an actual retreat if we want to go that route instead. But if we're not taking a retreat, let's not call it that.
I agree.
But we'd all pay for our own, not on the city dime.
That's right.
And to be clear, there is a rule, a law, something that you pretty much need to do it in town.
Yep.
So
Yes.
With council liaison assignments, a couple points. I do plan on asking Tim as council president to cover for me a little bit more this year with some of my county stuff, just because I'm going to be busier this year with League of Oregon Cities. So heads up, Tim. And then
Did we cut
sounds
your
like
city
status
pay
quo.
for that?
yes, my pay has been adjusted and from the city side and increased from League of Oregon City side effectively. So,
0 to 0. Gotcha.
yep. Yes, and there's not even any nice, normally when you're League of, you do some pretty good trips as League of Oregon City president, and I don't foresee that happening. That's all right, busy in other ways. And then Tim is the liaison to the school district, and he attends their meetings regularly with different changes that are occurring. It's up to Tim or whoever just continue to do that, but I don't know if we need to have a council.
Well, we need it. With all of our other liaison positions, we actually attend a meeting, we participate, we're involved. Right now, the way it's working with the school district is showing up at their board meeting and just giving an update on what's happening in the city. So it doesn't quite have the utility that our other liaison assignments have. So I'm fine with keeping it. I just think we're going to have to actively work with the school district on reshaping that, because it's I think it's important that we have dialogue between the electeds on both sides, the school board and the city council. I don't want to say it's broken. It's just we need to work on that, because it's not happening on a regular basis at this point. So, and I think we're going to have to change how that works.
Yeah,
we've tried a couple times to change it without great luck, so we need to keep working on that.
Yeah. Other thoughts on liaison assignments?
I'm happy to keep mine as they are. I've kind of started to establish some relationships with some of the regional water provider, folks, and I'd like to keep that going for at least another year, unless anybody has a real strong urge to be in the regional waters or Willamette intake facility.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean.
I'm good with keeping mine.
The general contentment. This is great. Okay.
I want to hear from Doug, though, because he has the most grueling assignment of all of them.
I'm watching you, Doug.
I actually was thinking about this. I feel like right now, with all the comp plan update and the other things that are in flight, I think the continuity is good. I'd like to stay on planning commission and kind of see that through. And then, 2 years from now, I'll either be off council or I'll be ready to. Well, I guess we can talk about it next year. So in a year from now, we can talk about it again. But for now, I'd like to keep the continuity going.
I was thinking that when I saw down below it lists who has how many assignments, and it says Doug Scott has one. I thought, but he's got one that's every other Tuesday for hours on each. So I think that counts as 3 or 4.
Well, I mean, it hasn't been that bad of late. It's not. There's certainly long ones, but there's some that aren't as long. But they're also I'm on and Russell is as well as on a couple of the advisory committees for the conference.
Right.
So there's some extra time on there as well. So.
Yep.
But I'm enjoying it, so I'm happy to stay.
Good.
Awesome.
I'll just add too that some of the assignments that are related to League of Oregon Cities committees, like Transportation Committee, etc. Those are you can answer this question. I don't think there's any reason we can't have more than one counselor on some of those committees or on a different committee. You just have to apply if you want to do it, and those are open.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, this is great. I'm thrilled that we're going to have continuity for another year. And Doug, I'm glad you enjoy and are willing to continue It'll be liaison for planning for at least one more year, and the others, because I do agree continuity that is important. And a lot of important things are occurring, but historically, from what I've seen either as mayor or councilor in the past, it is sometimes tough to fill that volunteer liaison slot. So I'm very appreciative, Doug. So moving on, council visioning discussion. Joe?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So I shared a proposal late last week, or maybe it was on Monday. The same consultant we used last year, Dr. Mowry with SGR, is willing to come back and spend one day with council to help us through goal setting and visioning for the next fiscal year. He suggested 2 dates that work in his calendar. The first date is February 20th, which is a Saturday. And then his second available date is March 6th. I'm hoping the 20th of February would work with everybody, because I feel like the sooner we get started, the better. He would like to do it in person. He thinks it's very important to have this discussion happen in person. So we've talked about doing it at the Arts Center in a much bigger space, socially distanced. If someone on council was not comfortable to participate in person, we'd have that person call in virtually. But I have spoken with many counselors and they seem to be okay with an in-person meeting, as long as we're doing things with proper social distancing and things like that. So, and we have a beautiful facility that's very large across the street that's available.
Thanks, Joe. Tim, got your hand up.
Oh, it's been up for a while, but I'll talk anyways. So can we talk a little bit about our agenda for that session? You know, we seem to be, as a group, at least the high level goals in terms of economic development versus residential and some of the other things we talked about still seem pretty much on that path. Does this visioning session need to capture any additional items and focus more on what the projects are, or do we want to have a visioning session where we step back and start from scratch? Because I think that gets to the scope of what the consultant's going to come out and talk to us about.
I have a thought there. I think we could do some pre-work where, you know, individually we could almost like a survey or something, right? Where each of us could indicate all of the existing goals from last year, whether we feel like, I'm just making this up as I go here, but like whether we feel like it should still be in the plan for next year or it should be revisited or definitely shouldn't be, right? And so then coming out of that will give us to kind of set the ground a little bit. And I think we do need, there will be some new things. I'm sure I can think of a couple, but at least we might have ahead of time, we might have a good sense of stay, adjust, or no longer need it right off the top.
Is that sort of what the consultant will go over with each of us in our one-on-one conversations, and out of that he will formulate that?
I think that was his intention, Councilor Young.
I forgot about that part. Thanks. Yeah, that's exactly what I mean.
As long as there's no trust fall.
No, I don't think he knows you well enough.
I guess the point of my question was, you know, is just making sure the consultants kind of geared up for what we want to accomplish and you know, leverage the good work we did last year and just build upon that is kind of where my head is, as opposed to having what's the example? You know, the big, like we don't have any new council members, right? So we don't have to go through that whole exercise of getting to know each other. We can just dive right in.
Yeah, no core value index mumbo jumbo stuff.
I wasn't going to say it, but yeah.
Oh, and on something like, unless it's contradicted by the interviews, on something like, let's say the economic development, that could be pretty straightforward status quo. Like, yep, keep doing what we're doing, do more of it. We don't need to go through a 60-minute exercise of reviewing everything that's in there and saying, yes, we still agree with it, right? It could be, okay, move on to the next one. So I think. Yeah,
and you may recall last year he did this over 2 sessions, and I talked to him and he totally agreed. Is like, this is a 1-day session, start at 9 o'clock, finish by 3 o'clock, if not earlier. And that was my sense, that this isn't starting from scratch, because it's the same 7 members that were involved last year. It's the same consultant, and I envision there'll be some new projects added to the mix and continue the projects that we've been working on, is my sense of where you're going to go.
That would be great if we could keep the focus on that, is what we set out for goals last year, what's the status of those, any changes we need to make going forward. Nothing personal to anybody here, but I'd like to skip any of the feel good, let's get to know your fellow counselor, HR training exercises. I don't think they're necessary. So
Okay, fine. Renee and I will just go out to lunch and leave you guys.
I know.
Nothing personal. When I
Totally
start a
fine.
sentence saying nothing personal, that means you can't take it personally. That's the
I
rule.
think we all know that, or everything we've done.
Yeah, so I think we're good. We don't need to, guess each other's, first pet's name or anything like that. So,
Hey, Joe.
I think team building is important. Personally, I get the consensus about not having to do the core index or be squishy or know your pet's name. I get all that, but team building is an important piece of, and we are a team. We're a team of 7 that have been elected to effectively represent our community. But that's just my 2 cents.
I agree, and I would suggest, and we would pay for this on our own, that we all go do a paintball battle.
Yeah, maybe not during an expensive consultant's time, but I'm not opposed to team building. I think Renee has suggested one time Pilates or something, but I wouldn't be doing it. That would not be me.
Hey, Joe, maybe if you would let us know kind of when, give us a heads up before the interview, because I want to go through the goals from last year and really think about those.
Yep.
Just let us know when that's going to happen.
Yes.
Are we on the 20th?
Does everyone have their calendars handy? Does the 20th of February generally look okay? Is that a weekend that, someone's borrowing Tim's RV to go to the beach?
I think it works.
I told you the answer was no, Keith.
So mean.
No, the 20th works for me as long as we're out by 5.
Oh, we will be. No worries.
Renee, what's the 20th look like in your calendar?
It's open.
Sean?
I think I'm good. I can make it work.
I still won't be traveling, so.
Yeah, I think I saw everyone do a thumbs up, and I'd rather get going on this and not get into March.
Before we have our interviews with the consultant, are we going to get updates from you, Joe, on where all these projects are?
Yes.
Okay.
Good idea.
You should have
those quarterly updates.
Yeah, you should have updates next week.
Okay. I had to get it in there.
You're so subtle. So subtle. Yeah.
All right, so we're 19 minutes away from our city council start time. Was there something else, Joe?
No, this is what I was looking for, Mr. Mayor.
Hey, can I mention something?
Councilor Griffin, you wanted to mention?
Yeah, can I talk about something that's on the consent for later tonight? I don't want to bring it up or take it off. Can I just talk about it?
Okay.
Or can I not? Is it okay, Josh? It's all right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so council rules, I just happened to go through them, and we had a bunch of little teeny errors and inconsistencies in the way things were worded from section. I sent all that stuff to Joe, but there were a couple of other things that I thought about including, and so we thought, I talked to Joe about this yesterday. I'm all for passing the rules if no one has any issues with them at the moment, but then maybe at a future time we review. One of the suggestions was, since we've experienced online meetings and pandemics, we should probably in our rules talk about, well, how our comments 24 hours in advance, because it's not in there. We've posted it, we tell the public, but it's not in the rules. We should probably take that into consideration. And I had just a couple of other minor issues, but nothing major. So. And
Councilor Griffin brought that to my attention yesterday, and because you have this charter requirement to adopt rules by the end of this month, our direction, and Josh agreed, is let's adopt the rules as they exist. I'll get your comments out to the council. We can talk about them. And then if we need to modify in March, for example, we can do that.
Yep.
Rather than
Sounds
get
good.
bogged down tonight, because you have a pretty heavy agenda.
Right.
Sounds good.
Russell, thanks for reviewing those. And yes, the world has changed a bit in the last year. So having it reflect that would be good, because we're going to be doing this for at least another month or 2 or 3 or
6.
bite your tongue.
Yes.
I bet June. I bet June.
Or
Can we just do this permanently?
No.
Oh.
The governor at some point will rescind her order on this, and then we will,
Okay, I vote for then.
when the governor rescinds the order.
He just doesn't want to put real pants on. He's probably wearing pajama pants right now.
Well, he just wants to be close to his kids, and you cannot deny, a loving parent
That's right.
that idea, I guess. I would
I'm
think.
sure that door is locked right now. Oh, he is a good parent. See?
So Joe, for the visioning session at the art center, we'll just spread out tables and senior staff will be there as well as those that can. And we'll
Yes.
just try to all be 6 feet apart or 2 to a
Correct.
table or something like that.
Yeah.
we can wear masks.
Wear masks if people are comfortable, and
Crank up the air.
Throw paper airplanes at each other with notes on them.
Or if we're 6 feet separated apart, maybe not wear a mask.
yeah, I mean, I think the comfort level, if you're 6 feet apart and you don't want to wear a mask, I mean, I don't think the council is gonna have a mask mandate. I mean, there's numbers in terms of how many can be in a space that big, and our group is small enough. And I think if you're not comfortable with someone 6 feet away from you in a big room, maybe you should think about participating virtually versus in person. So those are my thoughts. Mayor, do you agree with that, disagree, or other counselors?
Big room, and just make sure everyone is comfortable with things. So we would, I think we should treat it a little bit like court. We're doing temperature checks for court, right?
But we can do temperature checks. We have thermometers and things like that. So we can take as many precautions as needed to do a session in a big room.
I travel with hand sanitizer and Lysol wipes.
And
I
we
think if
are.
noth-
Oh, I'm
Renee?
sorry. Go ahead, Renee.
If nothing else, by doing all those different components, we're setting a good example for the rest of the community. So doing the temperature checks, wearing the masks, sanitizing, all that, I think would be a plus to set a good
Here.
example.
And this isn't unusual. In talking with other cities, a lot of cities that are meeting virtually for their council meetings are choosing to do an in-person council goal setting. So we're not unique in that direction. So
And there are for instance, the school board is meeting in person again.
yes,
So for the
Are they
regular
meeting at the high school or their building, aren't they?
their new administrative offices.
Where do they meet, in the library? Or do they meet in one of the gyms? Where do they meet?
It looks
New-
like a large classroom.
The Hopkins admin building,
Mhm.
the one that they went from that they put $6 million in there. So I would,
they have a very nice boardroom now in that.
It'd be nice if we got a tour, but hey, I'm just part of the public. So
After COVID, they tried.
So Joe, is it going to be the same facilitator, or is Ron Holyfield going to be coming out?
I don't think Ron will join us. I can confirm that, but I think Dr. Mowry, who does this, will join us.
Okay,
great.
awesome.
And then of course we'll have microphones and all that for those that are hard at hearing. That would be great.
Well, and twice as muffled with masks on. So
Yes.
Yeah, it was. I had an in many ways, interesting experience getting my driver's license renewed this afternoon. Good times.
picture with your mask on.
what a concept.
Almost. but had everything from I do not have to wear a mask conversation in front of me to trying to listen to instructions for someone who couldn't speak loud enough through a mask to other joyful 2-hour experiences.
So now we can update your photo on the website, since you got a new photo today.
Yeah.
That is a great suggestion if it was only possible.
So
All right.
can I just real quickly, Brad, are you still on?
I am.
Brad, thank you for getting this Zoom set up and working. This is awesome. It's
Great.
working really well. It's nice to be able to see everybody when we're
Mhm.
talking. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Like the beard.
So we all have 10 minutes unless there's something else. Russell, do you have something else?
No, not gonna sing. No, not gonna happen.
Darn it.
All right.
Let's take a break.
Going once, going twice. Work session's adjourned. We will be back.